What's up everyone? Lance Hedrick here, and today we're looking at the SD40 conical grinder. So many of you have been asking me to review this because it seems to be a really nice budget conical grinder. For so long, the niche has kind of been the standard in cone burrs, and outside of that, people have relied on the Brazza Encore and Virtuoso, on the Breville Smart Grinder Pro, on the Brazza Sette, and different things like that. And now we have this grinder that is essentially the cousin to the DF64. I have a video on that linked right here. Now the DF64 is a really affordable 64mm flat burr grinder with a 250 watt motor. It obviously has some quirks about it, but it's built relatively well, especially for the price of around $450 US. So this is made by the same company, GI Oda or Turin. It's a confusing thing. There's a hodgepodge of names floating out there. I'm not quite sure what to go with, but what I can tell you is I got this from the lovely Joe Kolb at Espresso Outlet in the US. I did buy this with my own money, and then when Joe saw I'd made an order, he actually refunded it. So thank you, Joe. So just to be above board on that. But let's just continue on in. So this is a 40mm conical burr grinder, electric burr grinder, obviously. It has a 180 watt motor, which is actually quite powerful. A lot of the Brazzas are about 150 watts. This is 180. To give you more perspective than just the Brazzas, you have the fellow Ode sits at 140. You have a lot of the cheaper 60mm flat burrs at around 100 or 120. So this is actually a very powerful motor for a small conical burr grinder. So we have essentially a hand grinder that's electric. Now, one of the big questions, as I've discussed in previous videos, is what the RPM is. This one sits at 750 RPM. Now, I couldn't find that information online anywhere, so I actually took out my tachometer before this video and I measured it, and it came out at 750. Now, that's actually quite high. When you think about hand grinding, that's where we're getting the most clarity, honestly, out of conical burrs. So there's this direct correlation between fines production and RPM. But not only that, it seems that maybe the particle distribution in general is a bit tighter when you go slower with cones. So the Weber Key, which is a new-ish grinder that came out within the last year, is a $2,000 conical burr grinder at 83mm, and it has a range of, I think, 50 to 150 RPM. You can't even go above 150. Something like this, the Lug 2, which I'll do a video on in the future, has a very small range as well, something like 80 to 200. The niche sits at about 330 RPM. They have some sort of planetary gear or a PID on their motor in order to lower the RPM to help with that particle distribution. I would argue that that's even too high. So 750, that's very high. That's a really high RPM for a cone burr, and I really wish that was lower. Now, when I was doing my testing, which we'll get into later, I did not know it was 750. I knew it was pretty fast, but I didn't know that. So that thought did not enter as a bias in my testing, just to let you know. Anyway, what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to take a look at some of the ergonomics, what I like about them, what I don't like about it. We're going to look at its performance, and we're going to compare it to the niche grinder because, well, that is kind of the standard in and has been the standard in conical burr grinders for a while. So the issue is the niche is kind of outpriced for a lot of people, and they're looking for something that is built well, built with a lot of metal parts, that can hold up on its own, that'll last a long time, and that will give you a good option for both espresso and pour over. So that's what we're gonna hop into. To start off, we're gonna take a look at this right next to the niche. So the first comparison is just optics. So obviously, just for relative size, the body of the SD40 is about 30 centimeters high, or a foot, and that is without the hopper. Then of course, when you add the hopper, it gets just a bit bigger, a little taller than the niche. Now, obviously, it's much more narrow than the niche is, which is kind of shocking because you would imagine that the niche is so big because it must have a robust motor. But in reality, this motor is actually a bit more powerful than the niche's. The niche does have 63mm burrs as opposed to 40mm inside of the Turin itself. So you have kind of that going on between the two. This one is quite a bit bigger. And of course you have aesthetics, but I don't ever really like talking too much about aesthetics because something like the niche, for instance, is quite polarizing. Lots of people adore the aesthetic of the niche. lots of people don't really like it. And I'm sure the same will be said about this, as with everything. Aesthetics are just polarizing, and that's up to personal opinion. So I'm not going to really get into the nitty-gritty of that. Now, of course, one thing that I do definitely prefer on the niche is obviously, first off, it has I think the workflow is just much better for the single dosing. Things with bellows, obviously, this still does need some bellows in order to get everything out, but it does have a lot less retention in general. The SD40, you need the bellows or you're going to have like more than a gram stuck in those burrs. So the bellows on this are necessary, and they tend to get quite messy. You get grounds kind of caught up in the bellows. You got to clean those out, which is kind of annoying. And then it can kind of coat this steel in here inside of the hopper. The switch on the niche is right here, which is really nice. I can never stand the buttons on the bottom. I don't understand why that's a thing, and the same can be said here. I don't know why there's a button on the bottom. It might feel good whenever you're kind of putting I can see the idea of putting this down and then just boom, your finger's right there to turn it on and off. But the issue here is there's going to be a lot of spray from this nozzle, from fines to chaff to whatever. When you're hitting the bellows, it's going to blow out of this of the catch cup. And you're going to get a lot of that grit kind of around the side of this button. And over time, that button's going to get gritty, and that's going to be an annoyance to clean. On top of that, I really do not like this kind of silicone pad down here. Now, there is a magnet underneath, which is nice. I'm 100% for magnets on every grinder. So if you're a grinder manufacturer and you're watching, make sure you have magnets. Okay, take a lesson out of like the EG1's playbook, where they have 2 places for your dosing jar. I'm obsessed with magnets. This is a little weak. I would enjoy a little stronger, but there is at least a magnet here, unlike the niche. But when this is on, the dosing cup, because the magnet's not quite strong enough, tends to vibrate and wants to come off the front edge. I've never had it fall, but it is a little a quirk of it. This is kind of like a silicone type rubbery thing, and that, especially since it's white, as coffee oils seep into it, it's going to turn brown. It's going to be annoying to kind of keep clean. I don't really like it very much. As far as dialing goes, the niche is obviously stepless. This one is not. You have the little button in the back that you have to pull down. There are 4 prongs on it, and there are holes all along the bottom of this disc. So you pull this down in order to turn it, okay? You can't turn it once it's locked in. You can't turn it. It has teeth along the sides, and those teeth plus the bottom, that's kind of how you're gauging where you're at. So there are a lot more tick marks than there are options for dialing in, which, I mean, I feel like I have a Robert De Niro face on right now. Like, come on. What's the point? What's the point? I don't understand all the tick marks. But it's actually good, because I think you could mod this into a stepless grinder quite easily, which I'll show here in a little bit. That's how we're dialing. That's how we're turning it on. We're using the bellows, which is necessary for this grinder. Otherwise, you'll have quite a bit of retention. All right, we're going to put the niche to the side. We'll be back to that later for a more direct comparison with taste and performance there. But what we're going to do now is go ahead and disassemble this grinder. So I'll let you watch in fast speed me taking this apart, because it's very easy and it doesn't require any tools to get the collar of the burr out. All right, so let's go ahead and get that going. All right, so as you can see, you can take off that collar quite easily, so you have quick access to the burr itself and to the collar to clean it as regularly as you would like. And putting it back in is super easy. There are plenty of threads here, which is really nice. Now, my speculation, and I assume this is right because it works with a lot of other grinders, but all you would have to do to make this stepless is pull this piece out, which it has those 4 little prongs that fit underneath into the holes down here. That's how we're changing the grind size. And each hole, by the way, is about 4 tick marks. So really, the smallest movements you can make are about 4 tick marks. So that just doesn't really make sense to me. But what you can do is you can take some plumber's tape and you do like a layer or 2 onto the threads themselves. And that's going to add a lot of friction, so it won't drift as you're moving it. It'll be much more difficult to turn, of course, but that's not a big deal. You're making minor movements anyway. And that's going to open up a lot of possibilities for your dialing in. So of course, as you're screwing this in, collar is getting closer to the cone. There you go. Now let's take a look at the cone itself. The cone is a 6-spoke burr, very similar to those in Etzinger's and the ones that Etzinger makes for Bratz and Breville, very similar to those. Now on this, it does look like a little bit more of an aggressive angle for the pre-breakers, but in all reality, the cutting teeth at the end, the finishing teeth, look very similar. And the collar is just a standard kind of collar. You have the open pre-breakers, and then you have similar grooves to the bottom of the cone burr, which is pretty common. So there's nothing really special about the geometry of these burrs. But I will go ahead and say they would perform a whole lot better if the RPM wasn't so high. Again, I'm spoiling the future, but what am I going to do? I can't help myself. Sometimes I get a little excited. I don't like surprises, so I'm the worst person for gifts. But anyway, so this is what kind of inside looks like. Super easy to take apart, super easy to put back together. All you got to do is take a wrench in order to take this nut out if you want to take the cone burr off to, clean it fully, but we'll just leave that in for now. There is one washer underneath. The last thing I want to bring up is it does have these sweeping arms on the base, which are supposed to help with retention. Now, I have seen that they actually go nowhere near close to the bottom, which doesn't super help. It would be much better if they kind of acted as full sweepers where they're able to kind of almost touch the bottom to really help lessen the retention, because right now there's still quite a bit of retention. You rely a lot on those bellows in order to get it out. So that's kind of an issue, but not a huge one. The bellows do help quite a bit, and the construction of this is quite solid. It's mostly made of metal, so it's well built. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and put this back together and see you on the other side. Okay. All right, well now it's time to go ahead and look at performance, and we're going to pull in our friend, the Niche Zero. Now, I've made a video about my thoughts on the Niche, which I'll link right here. I do think that over time it has been hyped up a little outside of what its capabilities are, namely that this is a great espresso grinder for those who really like chocolatey coffees. It doesn't really perform well at filter, and it doesn't really do that great with lightly roasted coffees, but it has probably the best workflow of any home grinder on the market, in my opinion. Super easy. The dosing mechanism is fantastic. It just does a great job, and that's why it sells so quickly. The price is high, and people are paying for it, and it's not a big deal because it does such a good job. But I was curious how this would stack up to it. Now, in the past, I have compared the Niche against the Brazza Sette, which I'll put a video link right there. And the Sette did a good job. That one runs at about 500 RPM, so a little slower than the Turin SD40, but it did quite a good job, especially on espresso. Now, the filter coffees on both kind of suck, just to be honest. So I was curious how the SD40 would do on filter. So I had a friend come over yesterday and we did a lot of tasting together. Of course, I've had this grinder for a few months now. Thanks again to Joe for sending it all the way to Portugal for me. So I've been using this for a while now. It's all seasoned and all good. But I had a friend over just to have someone else blind test some coffees with me, and we did them side by side. I took a while to match the grind size, and then I went through and I further dialed in both coffees so they'd have a similar TDS and extraction yield. We ended up sitting at around a 20% extraction for both and around a 1.35 TDS for a Kenya coffee for my friends at Nomyn in Barcelona. So at that coffee, or at that strength and at that extraction, they both seem to do a good job. And so we kept it around there for the majority of the testing. And then we tried another coffee with it as well, a Kenya from Klaus at Coffee Collective. Anyway, what happened was we brewed these a couple times. As I said, we were taking scrupulous notes, making sure all the numbers matched up, the drain time, the exact moments I was pouring, etc., in order to have as close as possible 2 cups as we could. And then we split them and we were tasting them blindly. We would switch and go back and forth, switching and tasting, switching and tasting. Almost every single time, just to jump to the point, we both chose the SD40. Now, let me explain what was going on here. One of the cups, and I would have Morgan explain to me in words what was the difference between the two. And it was similar to what I was getting, but what we both kind of ended up on is the SD40 had a juicier, sweeter cup, but it was quite muddled. And honestly, it had a lot more fines. I'll show a picture of its bed right here next to the Niche's bed. So as you see, the SD40's bed was quite muddy in comparison, even though the grounds were almost identical as far as the peak particle diameter. The Niche, however, had a much drier bed. It was a lot less muddy, but Interestingly, the cup was lackluster in the sense that it had actually more flavor separation. It was a little bit more, it had a little bit more clarity, but it had an acrid, drying finish, and it was kind of empty. So whereas it was more tea-like in the relative to this grinder, of course, it was missing a lot of that middle part, a lot of the meat of the coffee that I wanted. I don't like that I just used the word meat to describe coffee, but we did it and we're not taking it back. We're going to just push right through. So, this one did produce a lot more fines, but I'm speculating that maybe it had a more consistent particle peak, so maybe the distribution was more narrow at the peak particle size, whereas it looked like there were a lot of boulders that the niche created at such a coarse grind setting. I did it at almost the coarsest grind setting here, about 19, and I did it at a 50 on the niche, and that's where they both kind of were happy, about a 3-minute, 10-second total brew time with 15 grams of coffee to 250 grams of water at a boiling temperature. Anyway, so it was very unique, but this one I chose because it was more juicy, it was more chocolatey, more sweet, but like I said, it lacked clarity. It was very muddled. It didn't have a bitter finish though. It wasn't very drying on the finish. The finish was kind of pleasant. This one was kind of empty. It did have a bit more clarity. It was a little bit more tea-like relative to this. Obviously not relative to a flat burr. Because it's still, if I were cupping this, if I was tasting this next to maybe a DF64, it would probably be, I'd probably have the same things I'm saying about this, but about the niche, right? So it's all about relativity. So don't think the niche is, a high clarity grinder, but relative to this, it did have more clarity, a little bit more flavor separation, but it was kind of empty. They were small, if that makes sense. The notes were kind of small. They weren't as aggressive as I would want them to be. They weren't anyway. So between the two, I did prefer the Turin, but the Turin is very limiting. As limiting as the niche is of giving you a big spectrum of your coffees, say putting in a washed Ethiopia versus a natural Colombia versus a honey processed Kenya, which are kind of a new thing, but you're going to have very similar cups on this. You have even more similar cups on this. So you're essentially taking the distinctiveness, the distinctions of the terroir and of the processing, and you're kind of muddling them all into a similar profile, which the niche already does, and this does even more so. This might make a bit more balanced cup, which arguably is from particle size peak. I'm not sure. It arguably might do that. Who knows? All I know is it was a bit more pleasant of a cup, but you might pigeonhole yourself if this is your only filter grinder. Same with the niche, obviously, but neither of them do filter extraordinarily well. This one, again, was a little bit more pleasant. It was just more juicy, more sweet, but it didn't really have any distinctive characteristics. I couldn't sit there and name chamomile or rose or tangerine or passion fruit or apple or anything like that. It was more of a, there's some stone fruit, maybe some citric acidity. Oh, there's a nice sweetness, maybe like a brown sugar. There's a little bit of chocolate. Whereas this one, you had a little bit more clarity. Maybe you could have named it peach, or maybe you could have named it apricot, but it was kind of empty and it had a really drying finish, which was not ideal. So I'm going to go ahead and brew one of each, and we'll just go ahead and taste it blindly live on camera and talk through that as well. So we'll get that ready, and then right after that, I'll pull some shots and we'll talk about espresso. All right, so I just brewed up 2 of the V60s, one on the niche, one on the SD40, and I'm using a lightly washed Kenya from Tim Wendelboe. So this is one of those more classic Kenya profiles. You have black currant, you've got some lavender, you've got like some rose, you've got a little bit of chocolate, but not a lot. It's mostly vibrant acidity, really bouncy acidity. It's really nice. Anyway, we're gonna go and taste these. This is the SD40, this is the niche. They both brewed about the same exact parameters, so here we go. Okay, and then we have the niche. So between the two, this one has definitely a more, it's more of a delicate cup relative to this one, of course. So there's a little bit less body, even though it still has a lot of body. The middle is very empty though. There's not a ton going on. You kind of begin and it seems like you're gonna have some aromatics, some florals, but it kind of just is dead throughout and it has kind of a drying finish. You can get hints of some of those notes that I referred to earlier, so you can kind of pick up on some of the blackberry, but in all reality, it's kind of just muted and kind of empty. This one, on the other hand, you have a lot more of a juiciness, a sweetness. It's more of like, it's muddled, but you're getting that juiciness. You're getting kind of that idea of biting into a fruit, but you don't know what fruit, right? So essentially what you have with these conical burr grinders, well, with any grinders in general, is the potential of coffees can have undulations like so, right? Whereas up here, you'll have something really modern, really floral. As you're going down, maybe more fermenty, and all the way down, it's like really chocolatey, where it's all kind of muted out, chocolates, caramels. Some people love living down here. Some people love living up here. Some people like the option of both. Now, with a wider and wider particle distribution, in my experience, you're narrowing those undulations more and more, right? And so at the niche and the SD40 both, you're going to have a much more narrow, I guess, gap, right, between those two. Whereas you might be able to with like a 98 millimeter grinder with really quote unquote unimodal, even though that doesn't really exist, but a more unimodal distribution, you might be able to get super clear, really low bitter, really tea-like brews, and really chocolatey something else maybe. You'll be able to detect those two. But the more conical you go, the more it's going to kind of negate those nuances between them. And that's what's going on here. Over here, we're getting a little clarity, meaning I can see that there's blackberry, but it's kind of empty in the middle. Whereas this one, I'm not really able to detect blackberry per se. I get kind of like a compote, like a jam maybe, and then some chocolate, and that's kind of all there really is to it. There's no floral, there's no clarity. It's just a nice cup of coffee. This one, it feels like it's close to being there, but also it's just kind of far away because there's nothing in the center. What I mean by that is the main part. So you have that initial hit, then you have the meat of the coffee, and then the aftertaste. And it's not that it's unpleasant in that middle part, but the aftertaste is definitely acrid and drying. So there's definitely a big difference between these two on filter coffee. Let's go ahead and flip over, however, to espresso. Here you go. All right, so I just pulled espresso with both of them. Here's the SD40. Obviously, it was pulled first. That's why it's kind of deflated a bit. And this is the freshly pulled niche. Of course, I'll stir them both really aggressively with my Hoffman Umashiso collaboration spoon. And we're going to stir because we don't want to disappoint Daddy Hoff. Now, do we? Stirring that nice and well. There we go. Back and forth, back and forth. Bam, bam. All right, gonna wipe that off just a smidge, and we're gonna stir this. Help it lose some temp. Boom, 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 boom. All right, come on. Lose. Just blowing it to kind of equalize them smidge, and there we are. All right. All righty, so we got the niche. Okay, of the SD40. All right, well, on this one, and just like how it was when I was doing a lot of tasting over the previous months, the niche espresso does taste quite a bit better. In fact, I think the Sette 270 does a better job of espresso than the SD40 does personally. though it is loud as a mess and the gearbox can mess up. But I think the Sete 270 is a closer comparison to the Niche. The Niche, though, does do a better job, a noticeably better job at espresso. This has some white grape in it. That's really nice. This is a different coffee. I pulled a natural Brazil. And this one is just, and it's okay. It has a little vibrancy, but again, it's that muddled bit. It's and it's also a little more hard to dial in, a little bit more difficult because it doesn't have that stepless, even though you can do, of course, the hack where you take some plumber's tape to cover the threads to give it more friction. But it is still really nice espresso. You can get a really great shot of espresso at this, and it's way better than a third the price of the Niche, if that makes sense. I would say this punches above its weight class, of course, but the Niche does reign supreme as far as this comparison goes. Again, I think the Sete is closer to the standard of the Niche as regards espresso than the SD40 is. SD40 is cheaper and does filter a lot better, in my opinion, than the 270 does, and does better than the Niche does. So you have a lot of things to consider when looking at these conical grinders. So, well, you made it to the very end. I want to thank you so much for paying attention and watching along with me. The SD40, thanks again, Espresso Outlet, for letting me borrow it. I hope that what I said was intelligible and made sense, that you could follow along with the taste experiments. Obviously, what I did on camera is just a reflection of hours and hours and hours of tasting over the past couple of months, and obviously over a year with my Niche, and over 4 years with my Sete, which I just brought up momentarily. I think this is an incredible budget grinder for $250 US. It's going to be very difficult to beat. It definitely blows out of the water most of its competition in that price range. It still obviously is not going to equal the Niche on espresso. I just think the Niche does a much better job than this does. It has better body. It has better vibrancy, which is saying a lot. That's how low vibrancy this is on espresso in comparison. Now, that all being said, if you are handy with your hands and you know how to mess around with some things, I think if you threw some sort of I don't know, again, planetary gear or PID onto this motor and you lower the RPM, I think this probably would be better than the Niche. If you can get this down to 150, 200 RPM, it would be incredible. And the motor is more than strong enough to maintain torque in order to do a good job with lightly roasted coffees on this. I think the biggest downside to this is the 750 RPM. Anyway, that is my review. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helps you inform buying decisions going forward. Until next time, make sure you hit the like, the subscribe, the comment. I can't pander enough. But I hope you brew something tasty, and cheers.